So I want to start out, I was thinking, where do I start today? This is my first day. Do I just show slide pictures of vacations in Florida? What do I talk about? So when I am not sure where to start, I go to the book. And I have a particular passage that I wanted to read about. And the main theme is on the screen in front of you, but I'm going to read a little bit more of it because I think you'll see how it connects here in a moment. And this is from Judges. Judges is, of course, an Old Testament book. And this is Judges 18 when it talks about the Danites settling. So it says this, bear with me and I'll read it. In those days, Israel had no king. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. These men represent all the Danites. They told them, go explore the land. So they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite, so they turned in there and asked him, who brought you here? Where and what are you doing in this place? Why are you here? He told them that Micah had done for him, and he said, he has hired me and I am his priest. Then they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. And I'm going to stop there. In this story, they get sort of an answer to their question. But I take the lesson from that and I apply it to my own life, because how many of us, including myself on occasion, would like to ask the question, God, am I on the right path? Is what I'm going to do the right thing? Will my journey be successful? And I found that this answer isn't always clearly given to us. It would be nice to call maybe another pastor or talk to someone, call Tim and say, you know what, this is the way I'm going to go. Is it all going to work out? I just need a yes or no. That's it, simple, right? But we don't often get that. Instead, we kind of have to trudge through and hope that what we're doing is the right thing. And in that becomes kind of a series of trials and tribulations, joys and successes, things that we call life, right? So in my own journey, if I'm being honest, it didn't start in this cathedral, but it started in the Catholic Church, okay? So I know quite a bit about the Catholic faith because I was one for a long time. And I still love the ornate architecture and all the statues and sculptures and all that stuff inside of the Catholic Church. But when I was younger, I had something known as the church drug problem. I was drugged to church, okay? And God bless my parents, they made sure I went, okay? They made sure I went. And even though sometimes I went kicking and screaming, that was the drug problem. But it did produce an awe inside me, okay? And I didn't realize that it was going to be a kicking off point and a jumping off point for my faith at that time. And I remember one story in particular, because if you know anything about the Catholic faith, they have something called First Confession. And so if you can imagine this situation where I'm like a 10-year-old boy, and we have to go down the hall into the confessional, okay? And the priest sits in the confessional. And by the way, we knew the priest already, so I'm confessing the sins as a 10-year-old boy to somebody I know, and it's nerve-wracking. So what kind of list of sins do you create as a 10-year-old boy? Okay? So I had to think about this for a bit. And I came up with, I think, something like I hit my sister, and she hits me back. And sometimes I don't walk the dog when I'm supposed to. And I had this little list of sins. My daughter's smiling. Don't listen to that part. So I walk down the aisle, I get in the confessional, I give this list of sins. And he absolves me of the sins. And I remember just thinking, boy, I don't know if I can do this regularly. This is something I don't really understand, and it's kind of terrifying, but it really provided like a jumping off point in terms of who God was and who he was going to be in my life, because at that point in time, I memorized prayers and I went to classes, but I didn't really get it. And so there was a statue up on the wall behind the altar of this guy on a cross, and it was a little bit scary, and I wasn't really sure what it was about, but I knew it was prominent. Okay, and so God was going to fill in those blanks for me later in life, because at that moment, as a 10 and 11-year-old, you're struggling to come up with a list of sins, and I wasn't there yet. So there we go. So why am I showing you a mattress? Am I a bed salesman? No. So this is kind of interesting because the guy standing before you, I was born with a Bible in my hand, right? No. I was actually part of what one person told me was called Mattress Springs Church. And Mattress Springs Church is basically on Sunday morning you prefer to stay in bed, sleeping on your mattress, comfortable mattress springs, while everybody else goes to church. And bless my wife's heart, she was oriented toward God before me, and she would say, "It's time for church." You can tell the story better. And she would get the kids ready, and I would say, but sweetie, I've got my Mattress Springs Church is calling. Mattress Springs Church. You guys go on ahead. And she would take the kids and go. But at that time, I was kind of cynical and distrusting of churches, okay? Because I came out of the Catholic faith, which was fine, and I had sort of a raw understanding of who God was. But as I cycled into my 20s, Mattress Springs Church called, okay? And it's very persuasive because it doesn't demand much of me, and it lets me do what I want to do, and I don't even have to get dressed and take a shower, and it was easier than what God wanted for me. And I remember at work, I met a gentleman named Matt. I think he'd be okay if I told this story. His name was Matt, and he was a Baptist, and he was absolutely on fire for God. And I remember it looked just bizarre to me. I didn't know, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was like, why is this guy quoting the Bible? Why is he setting pamphlets about God on my chair at work? Why is he doing all these things? And so I would read these pamphlets. Do you remember this guy? Okay, and my reaction was holy and blessed, right? No. My reaction at that time was, what is this guy doing? Why is he leaving pamphlets on my chair? I'm at work. I'm trying to work. But it started to engage my mind. And so I had several conversations with him about God, and we talked back and forth. And he would make me mad, and I would make him angry. And that's how it would go. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I liked it, and I liked him. I think it was because he stood for something, okay? More than just, emotional ups and downs, and whether you're having a good day or a bad day. He stood for more than that. So I'm grateful to him to this day for the discussions we had. Small groups. So the picture, because you always have coffee at small groups, right? So small groups was the next stepping stone that God did for us in our lives. And my wife had a friend named Susan. And Susan Brown had a unique way of, God had gifted her. She would pray for someone that they come to church, and by gosh, they would show up at church. And here's me, Mattress Springs Church, congregational member, card-carrying Mattress Springs Church guy, and I come to find out later she prays for us, and I'm like, maybe we should check out church or a small group. And so we end up at this small group, and it begins to dawn on me that it's a people thing, not a building thing when it comes to church, and I'll mention more about that later. Because as I got in there and I met these people, some of whom we still know and keep in touch with to this day, changes began to happen in my heart. Okay, and that's, I think, often how it goes first, is your heart begins to change. Okay, and I wasn't ready to admit that. I didn't want to cut up my Mattress Springs card yet, but things were starting to change for me. And they read a book called The Purpose-Driven Life. And The Purpose-Driven Life is written by a profusely famous pastor named Rick Warren. And it's a thick book, but it's a good book. You may not agree with everything he has to say, but as I began to read that book in this small group, I couldn't get enough of it. So I would read it, in the car when I was waiting for something, for a meeting. I would read it at work on break. But at this point, I wasn't ready to fully admit that changes were happening. But that's how it started. And so from there, I ended up in the church itself. So in the church itself, and this was what's called a non-denominational Christian church, which is really what that means is they set up folding chairs in the school gymnasium. Okay? So non-denominational Christian church. And then, as we started attending that church, the pastor's name was also John, and he was a very compassionate guy. And then it fully hit me that the church is the people, not the building. Okay? It hit me, and I understood it, and it was like a light switch went on. The church is the people, not the building. Buildings are nice. Buildings are great. That's where we hold church services and worship services, but it's really God working through the people. That is the core of the church. And for the first time, I felt that here. Okay, I didn't feel that until then. And Pastor John, bless his heart, he had no idea that he was talking to another Pastor John at the time. So I would actually print out 10 questions every week for him, and he would meet me for lunch. And I would ask him why, if there's a good God, is there suffering? Why is that, I would just go down this list of questions, and he would answer them patiently and compassionately. And I just laugh about it, thinking back to what he was probably thinking, because I have a feeling that's not what most people do. When they go to lunch, they probably just order food and talk. But I had, and my dad does this too with the bullet points. I had bullet points, but he was always had a smile on his face as he answered my questions. And every once in a while, he would refer to me or to seekers as lost. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about, lost? I found the restaurant, I'm here. So truly, folks who don't know God yet are lost, but helpful tip, maybe don't refer to them as lost if you're evangelizing to them. So from there, I began to hit the books because as my heart was becoming full, my head craved answers. Okay, so the heart's filling up. Now I needed knowledge. Why do so many people not believe in God? Why do so many people attend Mattress Church instead of Christian church? What about all these other religions? I needed answers to this, so I studied. I studied something called apologetics. Apologetics is the defense of the faith, and I studied arguments for and against God. And I began to let all these pieces of information in, and I studied philosophy. And I studied things like the cosmological argument, which says everything that exists has a cause. The universe exists. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And it opened my mind. All these things I had never heard or read about before. Okay? And so I started to get answers. And what I found, and this may not apply across the board, but what I found is most of the time that people who have problems with God have problems because of something that happened in their past. And it's usually not intellectual. It's usually a heart problem. They've suffered in the past from a church, or from somebody who went to church, or from something that happened in their life. And it's usually not intellectual. And when those unfortunate things happen, they begin to grab intellectual facts and weave them together. But a lot of the times, the root cause is not intellectual, of the reason for unbelief. So if God puts one of these people in your path, you can start at the intellectual level, but keep it in your mind that the real problem is probably a heart problem. And so we treat them with the respect that they need and that they deserve, so that you can change their heart first. And if it has to start with facts, it can start with facts. That's fine. But don't forget, it's probably a heart issue. Matthew 7:7, which we read at the beginning of the church service. You folks remember that one? What does it say? If we knock, what happens? The door will be open to you. So at this point in time, I was what they call a baby Christian. And I was really excited. And I was turning into the guy that put pamphlets on my chair. Okay? I was becoming that guy. I didn't put pamphlets on people's chairs, but my heart was doing that. And so I said, I'm going to try this out. Jesus said it. Must be true. I'm going to try it. So I prayed, and things would start happening. Prayers would start coming true, okay? And it's so weird to talk about this stuff because it literally, I would pray or we would pray about something, and a day or two or three later, that thing would come to pass. And that produced in me a fear and an awe, okay? First there was excitement, then there was fear, then there was awe. I'm like, wow, God is real, and He does answer prayers. And so I never will forget my 40-hour-a-week day job is basically computer programming. So if anyone has ever done any type of computer programming, you'll know most of the time you get this much work and this much time to get it done. Okay, it's usually feast or famine. And so one time I received a special project, and my manager came to me and he said, we want to give you this project, but the only thing is, you're not going to get anyone managing you. Okay, so it's all on you if you fail or succeed. And then he gave me a master list of computer programs to work on. And I started working them in order, and things were going fine. And then our clients, who by the way would spend millions of dollars on these advertising campaigns, would switch the list. Okay? And sometimes my boss would tell me, and sometimes he wouldn't. He was a big guy, by the way. But when it would switch, then I'd have to start over again. Okay? Now, from life experience, do you think they switched to the deadline? No, the deadline stayed here. But they would switch my requirements every week or two. And so I began to get so stressed out that my heart was racing and I couldn't figure it out. And Shannon remembers I went to the doctor, and I went to the heart doctor, and I got on a treadmill and I did the little running test because I thought something might be wrong with my heart. And it turned out to be stress. So I prayed the prayer. I said, all right, God, I'm going to knock. Why not? And I said, I know that this is a multi-million-dollar campaign that our clients have put together, but if you can take it from me, please do so. If not, help me get through it. The next day, I got an email. My boss forwarded me an email that said they had canceled the entire project. The entire project. How many times does this happen with multi-million-dollar campaigns with our company? Never! How many times did it happen that I needed? It happened once to me. And it was the next day. And I went into my boss's office and he just kind of looked at me and smiled and he said, I don't know. He said they canceled it. Now, do I think God canceled that for me? I don't know. But from that point on, I was a solid head and heart convert to the Christian faith. So what is this picture? From there, God promoted me to the leadership team of a church in Des Moines. And I think there were at one time even 3 of us. So this was a difficult charge because, as you know, leadership is not always roses. And so what we are trying to do is keep this church going. Okay? And what I found out later is God wanted us to let this particular church, He wanted us to land the plane. Okay? He didn't want us to keep it afloat, which was strange to me. And I remember praying, and Shannon got this message from God before I did, as is not uncommon. And she said, I think we should probably switch churches. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm on the leadership team. And I listened well, then I no. And so we kept meeting, and we kept doing all the church leadership things, and we were trying to keep this church up and running. And then God started to speak to me. I felt it at nights when I would go down and pray every night. I would pray my list of prayers, and I would feel something in me saying, leave the church now. Leave the church. This is a Christian church. I'm on the leadership team. What are you talking about? And this went night after night after night for 6 months. Leave the church now. Leave the church now. And I remember one day, I sent the email to the pastor at that time, and I said, I guess I'm leaving. And in a week or maybe 2 after that, some infidelity came to light, some problems with money, and the church doors closed. Okay? So God, for some reason, didn't want me to be a part of that struggle. He wanted me out of there first. And I should have listened earlier, but maybe He knew it would take 6 months. I don't know. So that's what happened. sometimes we need to land the plane. So the lesson there, of course, is listening to God, and I should have listened sooner. So what is a logical faith? A logical faith, when your heart is full and your mind is full, the overflow of that fullness comes out through speaking with people or writing. So I began to write. It's an online blog, and I began to write these articles, which turned into articles that went into the newspaper, which turned into a book I wrote and published, and I had to pray over that one because I was pretty nervous about it. And all of these things were life lessons I learned from my experience, from my head being full and my heart being full. And the reason I'm talking about it here this morning is because God used it not for my glory, but for His glory. How did He do that? I'm telling you a story about a lady named Joan. Joan wouldn't care, I don't think, if I told this story. Joan had a daughter who was not a believer, who struggled greatly with the things of the world and temptations and so forth. And at one point, I got this email out of the blue from Joan, and she said, I just want to let you know, because some of the things you wrote and some of the things that happened in our church, she's decided to get baptized today. And from that, I could barely speak. I was just, the glory be to God. Okay? And it just goes to show you that one person, not necessarily me, any of you, from regularly talking about your faith or writing about your faith, can change the course of someone's eternal destiny. It is that big of a deal. God is good. Not long after that, the pulpit began to call, and it was kind of interesting because I couldn't shut it off. Now that my head was full and my heart was full and I was writing about it, it was time to preach about it. And so I would get up there and I would do these sermons, and it was so strange because I would write a sermon and all of a sudden I would get a phone call or an email. Sometimes it was only a matter of days, and they would say, could you fill in for us on this day or that day? And so I had a sermon locked and loaded and ready to go. And God began to use me in that way. And I would get up there, and I was nervous about it anyway, and I was anxious, but I would pray it away, and I would get up there and I would preach. And preaching is not like any other type of speaking, of public speaking. It takes a little more planning and a whole lot of faith, and God called me to it. And so quickly I wanted to talk about what the School for Lay Ministry is. So all those things up until now got me ready for the School of Lay Ministry, which is something that the Methodist Church does through the Iowa Annual Conference. And it takes lay leaders in the church and it trains them up. Okay? In 2019, I will graduate from this. And it'll be a great day. They lay hands on you and everything. And from this, just so you know, the pastoral candidacy program that I'm in right now, I will be, if all goes well, a licensed local lay minister in May of next year. And then from there, we do ordainment down the road after something called Course of Study. So they've got an excellent program here at the church that I've already started and I've already invested in. So the reason I'm flashing this advertisement as well is because as time goes on, if any of you feel that pull from God, this is a great way to go invest in that and become part of that with the church. And it led me, before I figured out that I could get involved with these classes, I perceived that something was wrong, okay? So I went to my pastor at the time and I said, you know, Sunday school's going great, I'm teaching it, everything seems to be going well, but something's missing. Something's missing, it's not enough. And he said, that's actually normal. It might mean that God's ready to push you into that next part of life. And here I want to offer you the advice that there's no such thing as spiritual neutral. Okay? We don't serve God in neutral. We're moving forward, or we're slightly backsliding, but I don't believe God allows us to just hang out. Okay? You're going one way or the other. There's no spiritual neutral. And by grace of God, I decided to put it in first gear and continue. Now, what is this picture about? I like this picture. Obviously, it's not a picture of me. I'm not a rugged outdoorsman. My wife's better at that stuff than I am, but I like this picture because I feel like it describes us sometimes, because if that's me, I look out over the mountaintops and I say to myself, first we're going there, and there, and there, and there, and there. And my wife looks up at the sky and says, you'll go where God wants you to go. Okay? You'll go where God wants you to go. And those two forces together help us work well as a team, because that is something we can't forget. Where does God want me to go? Where does God want us to go? So if you don't feel like you're on a spiritual adventure or you're looking out over a mountaintop yet, please try Matthew 7:7 and knock. Please try knocking. No such thing as spiritual neutral. And so that returns us to the part of the Bible where we looked at Judges 18, and we were asked the question, then they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. And the answer that I want to extend to us today is that if your journey has God in it, it will be successful. Okay? You will shift the car out of neutral. If your journey has God in it, it will be successful. Let's pray quickly together. Father God, we pray that we integrate your truths and your wisdom into our own personal journeys so that we might reflect better the church that you've given to us, the truths that you've given to us in the Bible, and your grace